Good morning. Welcome to the Adult Faith Formation. Just curious, how many of you came yesterday morning, were with us yesterday morning? Oh, look at that. They're all back. And it's fresh material, so that's good. We're so glad you're here. If you're a visitor, a guest, we are especially glad you're here today. We hope that you feel the warm Montview welcome. Dr. Tisby needs no introduction because we've been introducing him for the last couple months, but we are so glad you're here and so grateful to have you back in adult ed and in the pulpit. So let us give a round of applause and we will get going.
Good morning once again. Thank you for being here. Anything happening on this coming Tuesday? Has anybody heard anything? The November 2022 midterm elections are coming up. Did any of you vote early? Look at you. Very good. Well, I want to take this time to talk about something that has been consuming a lot of my focus lately. White Christian nationalism. This is a forum, and so it's going to be more informal. Some of this is just some of my current thinking that I'm going through right now. I'll speak for a little while, but then we'll have a time to dialogue, and I'll do my best to respond to any comments or questions you may have. White Christian nationalism first came on my radar around 2015, 2016, that presidential election cycle. I wanted to try to understand what I was experiencing. You see, by 2015, I had been speaking and writing publicly about race and racism for several years. And I thought I had experienced a good taste of what the pushback and the resistance was like from Christians and from the broader public. But I found out that what I had experienced heretofore was nothing compared to what I would experience when I started talking about race and this other thing, politics. It was a bracing reality for me that one could make the most tepid, moderate, mild statement that, hey, maybe stuff they're saying isn't lining up with Christ's example. Maybe the way they're talking about black people or Jewish people or queer people or poor people or immigrants isn't in the spirit of loving one's neighbor as yourself. And then woof, this massive pile-on, leftist, socialist, communist, liberal, whatever it might be. And I'm sitting there like, wait a minute, I thought I had experienced most of what you had coming. But then we start putting this in the political realm, and it reaches a whole other level. And I couldn't understand it even though I was experiencing it. It wasn't that I couldn't understand it, I didn't have a name for it. I didn't have a framework for it until I started reading about white Christian nationalism. What that frame did was tie together these disparate elements of race and religion and politics and gender and hierarchy and nation and you name it. I started to be able to have a grid and a lens through which to understand this vitriolic response and pushback. So, the question always is asked, what is white Christian nationalism? First, a couple of caveats. Number one, it's an analytical framework. It is something that scholars and researchers use to name a phenomenon. And for that reason, the terminology, white Christian nationalism, may not be used by white Christian nationalists. But they're still practicing it. Another thing is that the white is crucial. You'll hear it alternately referred to as white Christian nationalism or simply Christian nationalism. I think either way is fine as long as you understand the implicit racial messages, which I'll get to in a moment. White Christian nationalism. The third thing is it's not new. This isn't something that came up in the last presidential cycle. This has a very long history in the United States, different manifestations, but still this combination of religion and politics and nation and race and all of these things, still there. So there are several definitions I can give you of white Christian nationalism. The first one comes from Amanda Tyler. I'll give you the references if you want to learn more. She's of the... You go to bjconline.org. Christian nationalism is a political ideology and cultural framework that seeks to merge American and Christian identities, distorting both the Christian faith and America's constitutional democracy, distorting. But what's critical to understand, a lot of people will level the no true Scotsman claim about white Christian nationalism. White Christian nationalists, they will say, aren't real Christians. I understand where that's coming from. You're saying they aren't representing Christ. This is not the way of Jesus. True enough, but it's dangerous to say they're not real Christians, because guess what? They're in real churches. They're in real congregations. They really claim to be Christians. They really believe that what they are practicing is in line with Christianity, and it would be far too convenient for us to say, well, that doesn't represent us, we're not going to pay attention to them. No, they're in our churches, they're in our families, and they claim the name of Christ. So it's important not just to dismiss them as not real Christians, right? Here's another definition. This comes from the book Taking America Back for God. Taking America Back for God by Samuel Perry and Andrew Whitehead. Christian nationalism is an ideology that idealizes and advocates a fusion of Christianity with American civic belonging and participation. Notice in each of these definitions, the first sort of descriptor is ideology and not theology. It has a lot more to do with ethnocentrism and political power and culture wars than it does with theological explanations, right? They go on, they put an asterisk next to Christianity, and then they go on to explain what white Christian nationalists mean by Christian. In this sense, it represents more of an ethno-cultural and political identity that implicitly means evangelical Protestant, but mainlines and Catholics can come if they toe the party line. Cultural values as conservative, whatever they mean by that. Race, implicit again, is white, and nationality, an American-born citizen. Here's my definition. Christian nationalism is an ethno-cultural ideology that uses Christian symbolism to create a permission structure for the acquisition of political power and social control. They use Christianity and Christian symbolism to create a permission structure, a divine sanction for their pursuit of political power and social control. Last definition, and this I think is probably the most helpful. This comes from the book The Flag and the Cross. The Flag and the Cross. And it's by Philip Gorski and Samuel Perry. They say that white Christian nationalism is a deep story. It's a narrative with characters, heroes, and villains, and a plot, a narrative arc. And that deep story goes like this. America was founded as a Christian nation by white men who were traditional Christians who based the nation's founding documents on Christian principles. The United States is blessed by God, which is why it has been so successful. And the nation has a special role to play in God's plan for humanity. We're God's special little child. But these blessings are threatened by cultural degradation from un-American influences, both inside and outside our borders. It's a story about who we are as a nation, about who belongs, who counts, and who counts more than others. Now, those are all very wordy definitions, but the simple reality is white Christian nationalism shows up visibly and tangibly in many ways. So what are some cultural artifacts that indicate white Christian nationalism? In some churches, you go in and you look in the pulpit, and there's a Bible, and there's the actual pulpit, and there's also in a corner an American flag. Think about the messaging of that. Think about the juxtaposition of that. You'll get some churches that have these massive celebrations of the 4th of July. Almost like it's another liturgical holiday like Easter or Christmas. They're going to celebrate the 4th of July and the nation's founding. I wonder if those same churches will celebrate Juneteenth like that. The ways, if you ask them certain questions, right? So most of these definitions, a lot of these folks I've mentioned, they're sociologists, and they do surveys, and they ask certain sort of diagnostic questions. And by the way, another critical point, white Christian nationalism isn't a binary, you either are or you aren't. It's a spectrum. It's a spectrum. On one extreme are people who are overtly resisting white Christian nationalism. On another extreme are those who are championing it. The folks on the Reawaken America tour, Doug Mastriano, Marjorie Taylor Greenes of the world, they're championing it. But in Whitehead and Perry's book, they talk about accommodators who aren't necessarily waving the flag, but it could be happening in their midst and they're not going to say anything about it. And so there's a spectrum in between, and it's not just you are or you aren't. It's where are you in this broad spectrum of adhering to this ideology. Does that make any sense? I think that's important for us to realize, because we can't just go around sort of pointing and labeling people, because it could manifest itself differently. Some other things that characterize white Christian nationalism, it's generally anti-science. They're going to push back against ideas that we have to do anything about climate change. They're going to push back against vaccines and wearing masks and things of that nature. They are selectively anti-big government. I say selectively, why? Because they don't mind welfare for corporations, and they don't mind spending billions on the military. But when it comes to other social support systems, particularly ones that go to people of color and the poor, no, small government. And there is always this sense of aggrievement. Our way of life, our religion, our way of being in this country is under attack. There's a saying that I'm paraphrasing: when you're used to privilege, equality feels like oppression. For so long, white Christians in our nation have had a privileged position. Opportunities, assumptions that are positive about them. Now, the nation's demographics are changing. The religious landscape is changing. And now, they're hearing other voices, and they're saying, well, they won't let us practice our religion. They won't let us practice faith in the public sphere. They want to take away our guns. They want to rip the Constitution from its foundings and rewrite and rework it. All of these things, they make up enemies. like critical race theory? Why? Because it's easier to motivate people through fear than through love. So all of these things characterize white Christian nationalism, and I've said it before and I'll say it again. White Christian nationalism is the biggest threat to democracy in the United States and the witness of the church in the United States. Why do people seem to be turning away from Christianity in droves? Is it because y'all are too loving? You are way too inclusive. You talk about justice way too much. Are folks leaving because of that? Or are they leaving because they see people who claim the name of Christ pushing people away, fear-mongering, creating walls, lying, cheating, stealing? That's why folks are turning away. The hypocrisy they see. And they say, if that's Christianity, I want no part of it. Which is why I call white Christian nationalism the most urgent threat, which is why I'm talking to you in this forum about it, because we have to expose it to the light of day. Otherwise, if we don't speak out on it, they will continue to simply call white Christian nationalism Christianity and will misrepresent the faith. But I also want us to pull our focus and attention off of just white Christians, because the assumption and the practice is that whenever we talk about Christianity, it must be about how white people are practicing it, how they are representing it, or misrepresenting it, as if white Christians are the only ones who we should study or learn from. What if we shifted our focus to the witness of other Christians and learn that there are other ways to practice the faith, particularly faith in relation to politics? And so one of the things I'm keen on doing is saying, yes, there's white Christian nationalism. It is an urgent threat to democracy, an urgent threat to the witness of the church. It is more widespread. It is not a fringe thing. But at the same time, I quickly say that is not the only witness. We can take, for example, the historic black Christian tradition. There was a Methodist minister in the 19th century who was, like many ministers, not only a pastor, but an elected official. He was a state rep. And he explained that by saying a minister in this state cannot but do his whole duty except but he looks out for the political interests of his people. Why? For black people, policies and laws were a matter of survival. Why did black pastors, such as Francis J. Grimke, advocate for an anti-lynching bill? Because black people were being murdered extrajudicially. Why would pastors in the 19th century also run for elected office? Because after race-based chattel slavery and emancipation, they still had to rewrite the rules of society so that they could experience more opportunity and equity. Why would pastors like Martin Luther King Jr. also march in the streets? Because the laws of the land were oppressing them. And so you can look at the historic black Christian tradition as just one example of another way of practicing Christianity, of another witness to faith in politics, of another way to engage God in government. Because if you look at the record, when black Christians get involved in politics, it has tended to lead to an expansion of democracy, an increase in democratic voter participation. You will know a tree by its fruit. One of the things that many Christians, and particularly white Christians, I think, in my view, this is just Jemar talking, we fall into the error of false equivalencies. We want to say we stand above party, we stand above politics. Obviously, yes, we are citizens of the heavenly kingdom. Our hope is not on earth, it's in heaven. One day the heavens will come down and this earth will be remade, and our citizenship, eternal citizenship, is there. But can we move from milk to solid food? We have effectively a two-party system, especially at the national level. Right now, one of the two major parties has been co-opted by ideologies such as white Christian nationalism, and if successful, will make it harder for people to vote. We'll roll back social support systems. We'll narrow the definition of who counts as truly American. And I'm not making this up, they've said it. They've guaranteed it. They're already doing it in certain places. And so, insofar as your role as political actors, as people who reside in this nation, justice takes sides. I don't ever tell people who to vote for or not to vote for, and I won't do that here. What I will say is that we are Christians, and a very basic, ground floor, simple commitment we should all have is a commitment to truth, a commitment to reality. That's the sermon I preached at my white evangelical church I was pastoring the Sunday before the 2020 election. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for, knowing full well there were folks who would vote for both parties in the congregation. I said, vote who you vote for, but follow truth. And where truth leads you, let that guide and shape your political participation. So there's much, much more to say, but I'll pause here, give you a chance to process for a second. If you want to talk to someone near you, something that stuck out, a question that you have, feelings that you have, that's great. If you want to process independently, give about 90 seconds, and then if you have questions, I'd be glad to do my best to respond. So talk amongst yourselves. You remember that one? All right, we've got a microphone going around, so if you've got a question, please make it a question, and please be brief so we can get to as many as we can.
Okay, they're all in the back. Anybody up
They're
front?
all in the
No?
back.
You're gonna
Get
make me
your
go all the way?
workout.
All right, fine.
Run, there we go. Run, Forrest.
To Ben? All right.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Jemar Tisby. How much of what you see going on in white Christian nationalism reflects historical where we've been before as a globe? I'm thinking about Raoul Hilberg when you talked about the spectrum of persons adhering or being a part of this movement. Thinking of Raoul Hilberg's victims, perpetrators, and bystanders. I wonder what your thoughts are on that, and also how far this thing is going to go before we can put it down.
Thank you for that upbeat question. So, yes, victims, perpetrators, bystanders. This is the idea I try to get at with compromise and complicity. You know, all it takes for evil to prevail is for good people to do nothing. That kind of idea. And a lot of times I think that's what we're dealing with, particularly in the church. Any kind of justice issue you're talking about, inclusive of politics, is we're not always dealing in terms of a numerical majority with people who are overtly championing injustice. Rather, they're silent or passive or apathetic in the face of it. This is why it's so interesting the United States has some of the lowest voter turnout rates of any democracy for a lot of different reasons, including structural ones. But I do think that's part of our task and burden. There's also a long history of this stuff. I mentioned that before. I found this quote from William J. Simmons, who was the founder of the second coming of the Ku Klux Klan, the one I talked about in my Color of Compromise talk. He's the guy who led them up to the top of Stone Mountain, Georgia in 1915 and revived the KKK in the Jim Crow era. He was interviewed in the New York Times in March of 1922. This is what he said. "The Ku Klux Klan admits membership to none but native-born, white, Gentile, Protestant Americans, whose statement of principles was a restoration of the fundamental principles of American democracy as embodied in the Constitution of the United States, an organization whose code of conduct was Christianity." Isn't it interesting that our country's most notorious racial terrorist group admitted membership only to Christians? Native-born, white, Gentile, meaning not Jewish, Protestant Americans, again now it would be more cross-denominational, and this juxtaposition of the Constitution whose code of conduct was Christianity. That's a century ago. Racism never goes away, it adapts. Not sure if I responded to your question, but hopefully that was informative. There's one up here.
Thank you, Pastor. Thank you, Reverend Jemar, for being here. I have a double whammy for you. One, do you believe or do you think that white liberals are practically more racist than the conservative evangelicals? Because, well, I guess what I'm getting to with this is that white liberals like to talk about democracy and race and social justice, but really, do they really want to put it into action and make change, or they just want to have classes and courses and seminars on it, but not really deal with the issue of race? The reason why I asked that question, because I grew up in what we call Black Christian nationalism. Mm-hmm. The opposite. Well, maybe not the opposite, because there was a clear understanding that we were seeking identity from the white evangelicals. Tom Skinner, Black Christian nationalist, Bill Bentley, Carl Ellis, Ron Potter, all of us were considered Black Christian nationalists. And we were actually identifying ourselves with Black theology, but from an evangelical perspective.
Right.
Can you know anything about that? Can you comment on that as well?
Thank you. Yes, the question of white liberals, if you will. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote about them in Letter from Birmingham Jail, right? And he said, I believe the great obstacle to progress isn't the Ku Klux Klaner or the Citizens Counselor, it's the white moderate, right? And in many ways, I think that statement is still very relevant. My experience with white liberals or progressives, however you would like to label it, has been a lot of saying the right things, a lot of holding the right ideas, but relatively little actual experience of and among and with Black people. Don't know Black folks. And therefore, because you don't have what I call priestly proximity, cannot truly advocate effectively for and with the oppressed. So, if you even look simply at the civil rights movement, a lot of it was NIMBY. for Northerners and liberals, NIMBY, not in my backyard. It's so easy to look down on the South and its overt segregation and, as King said, their words dripping with interposition and nullification. They were out in front about it and notorious, right? And it was so easy for white liberals and progressives in other parts of the country to say, oh, for shame. And then it's like, cool. We're going to have black kids come to schools with your white kids because that's where the resources are. Busing, I don't think so. You're going to be up close and near, no, the Great Migration, black people moving from south to north, white people in northern and midwestern and western cities. Yeah, come on, welcome. Let me show you where the river is and the best restaurants. Nah. So it was so easy in juxtaposition with more overt racists to say the right things, to gesture at the right things, even to make some commitments. But even going back to the Civil War, you realize that many white abolitionists were not advocating for racial equality. They just wanted an end to the institution of race-based chattel slavery. So it's not enough simply to hold these ideas in the abstract. It has to be embodied. And what I often find is white people in general, and including liberals and progressives, get very nervous about a self-conscious black person. That we are black and proud, and not that we are just among you and we don't bring up race and we don't show our culture and our history and our experience. When this sort of assertive blackness comes, this is why people hated the Black Power movement, because they said, I'm black and I'm proud. And they say, I'm, yes, sir, ungawa. And they said, black is beautiful. And it was this assertive forward. It wasn't just, it's okay to be black. It's awesome to be black. It was a reclamation of our identity as being made in the image of God. And when we start to assert that around white people, even liberal white people, it's like, oh, you black. I didn't know that's what I was getting into. And then lastly is what I'll say is the redistribution of wealth. That's America's original sin, in my opinion, is greed. For centuries, we have hoarded wealth that has been accumulated by the theft of indigenous land and the exploitation of black labor into certain pockets, even in the church. And I don't think we'll see what I call a racial reformation in the U.S. church until, like the rich young ruler, we go and sell our possessions and give them to the poor, the historically marginalized. Let go of some of our clinging to this wealth, and I'm speaking mainly to white Christians, and distribute it more equitably. And that is a third rail for conservatives, moderates, Protestants, all of that. But until we deal with our money issue, it's going to be real hard to deal with any race issues.
What would you say the difference between Nazism and white conservative nationalism is?
You're really trying to get me in trouble here. Wow. I'm not an expert on German history or Nazism, but this is widely known that the Nazi regime took lessons from the U.S. racial apartheid system. The United States as a nation, politically, culturally, economically, put on a clinic in marginalization, segregation, and oppression, such that the rest of the world could learn from it. To me, here's my thing. we are not only studying history, we are making history. And so we can look back on the past and the witness of Christians when it comes to justice issues in general and racial justice issues in particular, and we can see a history of compromise and complicity, and we can say, such a shame, how disappointing, without ever realizing that we are living in the stream of history right now, and we are creating a legacy. We are living in the light of history, and for myself, I want it, if we should last another 30 or 40 years and historians look back on this era of history, I want it to be true that people can say Christians were witnesses to justice. Christians were not compromising or complicit. Instead, they courageously confronted injustice as best they could. And I want that to be true for me, and I want that to be true for you as well. And so there's a lot of bad witnesses to Christianity right now. A lot of people who I think are violating the third commandment. Remember that one? Don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Most of us think it means don't cuss. Don't use the word Jesus as an expletive, but it's so much deeper. What it really means is, don't do things that I would abhor and say you're doing it in my name. Don't you bring shame. Don't you bring disrepute on my holy name. If you go out and you claim me as your God, if you claim Jesus as your Savior, then you must walk like Jesus did and talk like Jesus did and practice the morals and the ethics and the love of neighbor like Jesus did. Otherwise, when you go out and you say, I'm a Christian, but you hate other people, you reject other people, you belittle other people, you condemn other people, you show contempt to other people, then you are taking my name in vain. That's what we're dealing with here. I don't know about all the people who are going out and it's just so easy to be hateful. I don't know what's going on in their minds or their hearts. All I know is I press on toward the goal of the upward prize of the call of Christ Jesus. Not that I've already attained it, but that's what I pour my life out doing, is showing the Christ in me to other people. I don't know what they're doing, but I know what I'm called to do. Amen? You know your mission. You may not have all the answers, but you know enough to represent Jesus well. He's given us enough to represent him well. He's taught us enough to represent him well. And the question is, will you have the courage to do it? Joshua 1:8, do not be afraid. Be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. Be strong and very courageous. And lo, I am with you to the end of the age. That is the promise, y'all. That is the promise. We sitting here, we wring in our hands. I don't know what's going to happen in the election. I don't know if I say this to this other person, are they going to like me? Are they going to? I understand it's legitimate fear, but understand the power within you, because it's beyond you. What we say in the black church, I got a joy the world didn't give it, and the world can't take it away. Do you believe that, though? Because I'll know a tree by its fruit. Do you believe you have that Jesus power in you? And if you do, how much you approach politics differently? How much you approach justice differently? Y'all, God is sitting up here saying, it's going to be amazing when they really understand that I'm in them. Just watch out when they start to get it, that I'm with them. Just you wait and see when they truly believe that greater is he who is in us than the one that is in the world. Woo! So let's not tiptoe. White Christian nationalism is dangerous. It's pernicious. We got to learn about it. We got to know about it. But we know in the end who wins. Jesus every time. Jesus is infinity and O. Nothing but wins. They thought they won. Remember that day on Calvary? Oh, look, listen. They thought they won. They hung him on that cross, didn't they? He died between two thieves. He was a criminal. He was stripped naked. We like to wrap a loincloth around. He was naked on that cross, powerless, bloody, bleeding, human body broken, and he died. But he didn't stay dead. Because on that third day, he got up with all power, and that is the power that he gives to you. Oh, my Lord. You've got death-defying power. Whew. Do you know what that means? Yeah, but do it with confidence. Do it with your chest out. Do it with your chin up. Do it as if you actually have the truth. Y'all, this ain't abstract. This ain't words on a page. This ain't words from a pulpit. This is spiritual. This is supernatural. You think God ain't working in you? You think he won't? We've got a better witness. We've got a better witness. Don't you dare, in the light of the power of Jesus' resurrection, walk out of here like you've got anything to be afraid of. Like you've got anything to ultimately worry about. I'm not saying sweet by and by, leave it all till we die. I'm saying take action as if the Holy Spirit is in you and Jesus is right beside you, because that's the truth. That's our witness. That's our confidence. Can we just preach this in the next service? Can we just record that? Thank y'all for coming out. The choir has to rehearse. Y'all are wild, man. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for being here. We invite you to stay for the 11 o'clock service. You can get a little bit of this again. So we are so grateful. Dr. Tisby, whew, we have the time for the choir to rehearse, so we will let you do that. And if you want to get a cup of coffee and come back for 11, that'd be great.